Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar in the series of mini-grid webinar, in the mini-grid webinar series. This webinar is titled Mini-Grid Financing, Enabling the Role of Local Banks. This webinar is organized jointly by Hydro Empowerment Network, HPNet, which is a network of South-South practitioners working in microhydro sector. Visions, which is an initiative of Wuppertal Institute and also a core supporter of HPNet. Energypedia, which is an online platform for information sharing, and here you can also find other resources like our past mini-grid webinar series. My name is Ranisha Basnet, and today I'll be moderating this webinar along with my colleague Dipti Vakela. Before we dive deeper into the topic, I just wanted to let you guys know that on the right side of your screen, there is a box where you can type in your questions. We'll be collecting questions throughout the webinar and then answer them towards the end of the webinar. And if you cannot see that box, you will be able to see an orange arrow icon, and please click on this icon and the box will expand. So before we go kickstart the webinar, I want to do a short poll to understand where are you guys coming from. So on your screen now, you should see a poll that says, where are you based in? So please tell us where are you based in. That could be Africa, America, Europe, South Asia, Southeast Asia. I will leave the poll for another 20 seconds because I can see people are answering, and yeah. So let's leave it for another 10 more seconds. And now I'll close the poll and display the results. So today we have a lot of listeners coming from Europe, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. Welcome to everyone. Now I want to kickstart this webinar with my co-presenter Dipti Vakela, who is going to set the foundation for why access to financing is important for mini-grid. Dipti is the co-founder and manager of Hydro Empowerment Network. Dipti, the floor is yours.
Okay, it's great to be here. Thank you for joining our webinar. Ranisha, will you?
Yes, I'm just going to switch the screen so that we can see your presentation.
Great. You should all be able to see my slide here, which is a graphic of the of what we see as a microhydro project. Microhydro viability depends on a system that is well designed and well installed, but also it depends on the quality of parts and then a few things that are post-installation related. So for one, if the main grid arrives to a hydro mini grid, we want it to be able to connect to that main grid and feed into the grid, if that makes financial sense. And more importantly, we want this hydro mini grid to address the needs of the local community and local consumers, both the household needs as well as the productive end use. And so when we talk about credit, why is this topic of enabling local banks important? Well, we have seen in our network, we have members across 10 countries, and over the last 6 years of doing knowledge exchange and sharing between these practitioners, we have noted that oftentimes grant and subsidy funded mini-grids can be short-lived. This is because there is less or no accountability for the financial and economic viability of the project. There are donor funds and the focus is on installation, but what happens after the installation is not thought through because there isn't a mandate to think about those things. In addition, because there is no accountability to post-installation status of the project, there typically is no or very minimal revenue generated. And when you have operation maintenance, some cases rehabilitation of the project required, there are no funds because the donor funding was only meant for the initial installation. Secondly, when you have credit and finance-based projects, that it actually mandates high end use, high productive end use. So when you have a developer or a community that has taken a loan to build their mini grid, they have no choice but to understand the end use, whether that system is under designed or over designed. They must include that in their process of implementation. Secondly, the ownership and management of these mini grids often go towards enterprise-based models. So typically in a grant or subsidy-based project, you have only community-owned projects, which are great, but often communities lack the mindset to establish enterprise-based operations of the project. So, for example, oftentimes projects are only run in the evening time, but with microhydro, you have 24/7 of high-quality electricity which you want to utilize for livelihood and productive end use all throughout the day. And so when you actually take credit and financing to do such projects, you end up thinking about what should be the incentive to generate productive end-use consumers. And finally, revenue is generated when you have credit-based projects. So that means the community will have funds to address operation, maintenance, repair issues. And I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter and look at our website to hear these hindsight voices from Nepal, it should be Myanmar and Indonesia, where we have decades of hindsight that show when you have projects that are done with self-financing methods, you actually have much higher sustainability, long-term sustainability. We've had 2 panels in the last several months. One was just last week, where you will hear senior voices of the sector who've been involved in this work for 30 years highlight why credit is so important for mini grids. If we now look at just the basic elements of access to financing for mini grids, one is that you must have a financially viable model for that mini grid. So your demand and your capacity, all of that must be a sustainable business model. Secondly, the mini grid developer, whether it be a community or an entrepreneur, they must be able to access the financing through affordable collateral. In some countries, such as where I'm at now in Myanmar, the collateral is double what the lending amount is, which is not realistic. Also, from the developer's point of view, the interest rates need to be at a place where they're actually accessible and make sense for the project. The tenure of the loan is very critical. Most hydro mini grids require 5 to 10 years for payback, depending on the enterprise model. And again, in the case of Myanmar, lending is only done for 3 years. So how can we create a more enabling environment for mini grids? Next is the availability of capital for banks. Do banks actually have the kind of capital needed to implement mini grids? In many cases, this is not the case at the starting point, and so we need multi-actors to come up with ways to address this gap. And then we have risks. So the most common risk is currency inflation changing, and so if you have a loan for 8 to 10 years, and the exchange rate changes over this time, someone is going to have to bear the cost of this loss. And so we have to think of what kind of actors can address that gap. And then we also have the arrival of the main grid. So we need certain regulations and policies in place that would address this risk. Otherwise, banks will not be interested. And then to make all of the other factors to address those gaps, we need innovative, committed development partners, international organizations and donors who will collaborate to address the different gaps. One donor or partner will not have the answer to all of these aspects, but each one can complement one another. So I look forward to hearing from our speakers who will go in more depth of these aspects. And so I'll hand it back to you, Renisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipti, for setting the framework, and I'll now try to switch back to my screen. Superb. And yes, thank you once again. And before we go deeper into the case studies and learn from our expert panels, I would like to do one more short poll to understand our audience much more better. So on your screen, there should be now a second poll question. So please tell us what is your role? Are you working in the government? Are you working in international development? Are you a project developer? Are you a project financer? And so on. So since the answers are coming in, I'll leave it for another 20 seconds. So now I'll close the poll and then display the result. So today we have a lot of people who are working in international development and researchers and others. And thank you for taking part in our poll. Now I want to go into our first thematic case study, and I want to welcome our first speaker for the day. His name is Kapila Subasinghe. Kapila is the Vice President of DFSCC Bank in Sri Lanka, and he has more than 25 years of experience in project management and lending. And today, Kapila will share best practices to overcome challenges for local bank financing. Kapila, the floor is yours. I will now switch from my screen to your screen and also unmute you at the same time. So Kapila, we have switched back to your screen. So if you just click on my request. Yes, now we can see your screen and you can go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, may I start, Renisha?
Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you loud.
Okay, hello there everyone. It could be good morning, afternoon or evening. So within the next 15 minutes or so, I will speak from a bank's perspective on importance of local banks, thereafter why it is difficult to get them on board, and followed by what type of risk mitigation will encourage banks to finance mini grids. And I will conclude with the factors to be taken into consideration in formulating a tailor-made solution unique to each country situation. So, importance of local banks, or in other words, why not foreign banks? It's mainly, if you to speak of in a simple terms, I would say it's the loan size. The investment may not create economies of scale required to attract a foreign investment. The transaction volume could be too small and will make it difficult for a foreign bank to cover its overheads or cost of the transaction and also mobilization cost. And that will make it difficult for him to offer a loan at an affordable rate of interest. Also, since the income of these projects are always I would say in most of the cases in local currency, so hedging the currency to set off the currency exchange rate risk will also make it too expensive for local mini-grid developers to borrow from foreign entities. Further, if the investment is taking place at a very interior location, which is in most cases, the distance will make the investment not attractive to a foreign entity. This may be even true in certain cases for some of the established local banks, which we will discuss later. So these factors make local banks an essential stakeholder in financing mini grids in most countries. But let us now see why local banks are reluctant to finance the sector. Lack of understanding. So here, due to lack of technical knowledge, the banks may not know how to carry out a technical appraisal and how to read and understand a resource assessment report or its accuracy, or that matter even whether it is even its completeness. So therefore, they need some sort of assistance, guidance, training. And further, how to identify and address social and environmental implications arising from the investment, which is also a problem for them. Then the longevity. The mini grids usually requires loans with a long tenor, and therefore the banks will have concerns on competency of the developer to undertake such a project, whether the company will be in existence for that such a longer period, whether this developer will be there. So what will then the possibility of machine breakdowns before the loan is recovered, then how it is going to be addressed, what if they can't locate the developer. Then there's lack of standards and regulations to benchmark the investment. So without any industry best practices, they may find it difficult to check, okay, but whether this project is with acceptable standards. Then the financial constraints. The asset and liability mismatch is a very common issue. So basically, the bank deposits are mobilized for a shorter tenure. In most cases, it's for 1 year, whereas these mini grids require long-term investment. So this huge asset and liability mismatch sometimes make it difficult for the local banks to go for long-term loans. Further, lack of collateral is also a concern, with project assets becoming worthless in the event the project is a failure due to poor resource assessment. So this the structures, equipment, whatever they have funded, they cannot sort of remove and use it elsewhere. Then again, another serious and a widely discussed issue: what will happen if the grid arrives? Whether the project will still be viable. Then the fourth important point, I mean, why they are so reluctant, is the regional or rural presence. So some of these established banks, similar to the foreign banks, will focus their activities in commercial city centers and may reluctant to finance mini grids in a rural location, as they will not have the grassroots level network to reach that area, which will result in high cost of monitoring and follow up, and again which will result in high cost of borrowing. So let us now discuss how these risks can be mitigated. So lack of understanding, obviously it should be addressed through training and capacity building. This is essential to build confidence of the financial institutions, and programs designed should not only cover the banks, and also it should address the needs of the developers and beneficiaries. Why? Because competency of the developer and the knowledge of beneficiaries are also essential in the confidence building process to encourage banks to finance the mini grid sector. The training programs can be designed to cater to the needs of each stakeholder, as discussed here. So whether it's the resource assessment and technical appraisal for the financial institutions, or for developers' perspective, what they require, or the beneficiaries, the basic operational and maintenance and the safety aspects. Then the regulatory framework, which is essential to ensure a long-term sustainability. In the process of building up the human capital, certification, and establishing standards and guidelines, these are important, as very important as discussed in this slide. The state intervention in establishing standards and technical assistance of multilateral agencies will be very useful in this respect. Also, uniformity will speed up the learning process of the banks, and it will encourage them to grant loans to this sector, because then once the uniform standards are available countrywide, it will be easy for them to, because they know where they should put their investments. Because now human capital, it can be on resource assessments, project developers, environmental and social assessments, then the certification. These labs and accredited agencies need not be locally, but even foreign agencies, then they should have proper links. Then locally the equipment is certified. So these will gain the confidence of the financial institution. Then from the technical standards, the safety, reliability, and the industry best practices. Then the regulatory framework to be continued. Some other factor aspects to be addressed in this consumer protection, supervision, and resource assessment. The consumer protection will ensure uninterrupted operation to a great extent, and thereby continuous debt servicing from a bank's point of view. And random verification by the regulator will ensure that the developer will have attention to detail, and the independent resource assessments will be more acceptable to financial institutions. So these factors, the regulatory framework addressing these issues, will always encourage banks to participate in the sector. Then the asset and liability mismatch. The short tenure of the bank deposits, as discussed, may restrict banks in granting loans, and in certain countries, the financial regulators' clearance may require the banks if they are to lend long term. So this is happening in certain countries. Obviously, for the regulators' point of view, they are protecting the best interest of the depositor, because it's a 1-year deposit. Look, no way that they will permit you to grant a 10-year loan. So this is where the assistance of multilateral agencies are required. So more than a concessionary rate of interest, is longer tenor in a credit line will be very useful. In countries where the mini grid has matured to some extent, they may also consider granting loans based on the cash flows of existing projects. So basically, then the existing project cash flows can be linked, and in such countries, it will be easier for the banks to move in and to some extent minimize this asset and liability mismatch. Also, the green funds can be of help, and at the beginning, at the infancy, until during the learning process of the financial institutions, they can fund the projects, and once they are mature and the cash flows are demonstrated, then gradually the banks can take over. Then the collateral. So here, as we discussed, the project assets are worthless in the event of a failure, and therefore, a quality resource assessment is an absolute necessary to get the confidence of the bank. So if you are doing cash flow based lending, a quality resource assessment is a must. Further, in hydros, the weather pattern. So almost all countries have a dry period and a rainy season. So during the rainy season, the power generation and therefore the income is supposed to be high. So this loan amortization by season will ensure that a higher portion, relatively a higher installment is paid during the rainy season, whereas a relatively a low installment during the dry season, keeping the annual repayment as per the schedule. So that is what is important. If you are paying back the loan in 8 years, it will be 1/8 of the loan will be recovered within a year, but in certain months you will be paying a relatively higher installment. So this will ensure that there is no arrears built up due to changing weather patterns. An escrow account is also can be established where the entire income is routed to this account and the money is released on priority basis. The priority number 1 will be operation and maintenance, including monthly standard expenses. Second, the debt servicing, and the third priority will be building up a reserve. 3 to 6 months of debt servicing. So this will make the banks very comfortable, because then in the event of extreme weather conditions like a severe drought or even flooding, in the event of a machinery breakdown, there will be a fallback option. Once industries are matured, these things can gradually be adjusted, but initially these things will be required. Then ability to sorry. In addition to project assets, usually the shares and project documents are taken as collateral. Why? Because in the event of mismanagement, then the project can be transferred to another entity as a going concern. So this will enable the bank to operate the project through another investor in the event there are any unforeseen issues with the promoter. Then the multilateral agencies may also support with partial and conditional credit guarantees. For example, in the event there's a drastic deviation with a accredited resource assessment done by an accredited professional from the actual, or even equipment failure tested in a certified lab. So in certain instances, there can be partially credit guarantees made available, which will be useful. So then the government policy on electrification. This is an issue discussed in very many forums. The options available if the main grid arrives before the investment is fully recovered. So here the developer and the bank will have to do a fair assessment of the grid expansion. And a decision thereafter, decision will have to be made by the investor whether you go for grid standards or light-handed regulations where at a relatively low cost. So here the issue is the incremental cost of achieving main grid standards, which might justify light-handed regulations to keep the cost down and thereby making electricity more affordable to the rural community. But however, if such an approach is to be taken and encourage banks to finance, a clear and a transparent compensation mechanism should be in place to and there should be document process. The procedure should be documented in the event what to do if the grid arrives. So this such a clear and transparent compensation mechanism will encourage institutions to invest more in these projects. Then the outreach. So the regional and rural presence. If the remoteness of the mini grid is such that it is out of the reach of the branch network of an established local bank, then what? Then you have to bring in the intermediaries, which can be regional or rural banks or even microfinance institutions in the event it is a very small project. These established banks can give block loans to these intermediaries on the financial strength of those banks. So they will finance the intermediaries based on the strength of their balance sheet with strict conditions, with specific purpose of the use of that money, and also close monitoring of the bank, not the individual sub-projects. However, if this is to be done, a lot of training and capacity building and very rigorously will be required at the rural level. So in summary, these are the risk mitigation activities that we discussed. So what is important here is you can't just take one of these tools in isolation and then try to implement it, because these are interlinked. For example, the cash flow based lending is linked to the financial regulations of the country. The training and capacity building is linked to the funding mechanism. I mean, if you are bringing in intermediaries, then more training and capacity building is required. So the energy regulations are again linked to the standards and regulations. So they are always linked to each other. So always an integrated approach with the right mix of strategies is required to ensure the engagement of local banks as active stakeholders. So how do you find out the right mix? So what are the criteria to be used to find out the right mix? So all these tools are there. So but if you go to country A, what are you going to do? From country B, C, X, Y, or Z. So selecting the right mix of strategies, you have to take various factors into consideration: the size of the country, the population density, the rate of electrification, the grid expansion plans, the financial inclusivity, to what extent the rural communities, the developers are using financial products, then the skilled technicians, whether they rely on the foreign technical skills or if they have it in-house, or level of awareness. So these things have to be considered, and only on that you can select the right mix. There is no unique solution here, and strategies adopted in one country cannot be 100% replicated in another. For these criteria should be analyzed and detailed to select the proper mix of tools and the extent, and also the extent that they should be used. Then, for example, a large country with low electrification rate with remote communities may require higher degree of training and capacity building at rural level. However, they'll keep the cost low, and arrival of grid may not be such an issue. So having regulations on grid arrival may not be so important, but having said that, light-handed regulations on standards, quality and safety will be important. In another country where the industry is mature with demonstrated capacity, cash flows of existing projects can be linked to finance new projects. Further, the demonstration effect will also facilitate training and capacity building of the banks, because there are projects, existing projects for them to learn. However, in such countries, a transparent compensation mechanism will be more important, because the arrival of BRIC will be more likely. So in conclusion, to create the enabling environment, so these policies adopted cannot be cast in stone. So this is a dynamic process and is required to be modified and fine-tuned continuously as the industry matures. So established standards, guidelines should be there, because what is important here is to minimize barriers to entry, where more and more banks will enter and decide to accommodate finance mini grids. So for that, you have to have established standard guidelines, centralized pool of human capital, information dissemination. So that will encourage banks to participate. And further, the bank should be made aware of other business opportunities within these mini grid communities. This is very important, so that they can cross-sell their products. By cross-selling, they are bringing down their overheads. By bringing down their overheads, they are reducing their cost of borrowing to the promoter. So obviously their overheads are reduced, overheads are spread over so many financial products. So obviously the rate of interest will be at least a fraction low. Then syndication of loans. Why? It will, from the bank's point of view, they will invest their portfolio in very many mini grids. Then in the event of a localized incident, bad weather, machinery breakdown, they have minimized the concentration risk, so they have the ability to withstand such things. From the new bank's point of view, this will enable them to learn on the job. So this is just a snapshot of the things that you have to do to encourage banks to participate. So it's a very holistic process. There are so many interlinks are there, but certain cases, okay, somebody will say, okay, the policy and the regulatory side is weak, therefore we cannot do it. But there are other avenues of doing it. If there are mature industry in a certain country, then they have a base to start. So you have to start somewhere and take it forward. The important issue is, if you can get one or two banks into the mainstream of financing, then getting the others is not so difficult, because then they will see the demonstrated impact and definitely join. Thank you very much for your participation. So that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Kapila. I'll switch back to my screen. Thank you so much for giving us examples or sharing experience from your work at SCC Bank, and also showing us strategies and so on. I'm pretty sure our listeners are learning a lot, and I just wanted to say that we will record the webinar and we will make the presentation available to you afterwards. If you want to contact Kapila afterwards, you have a chance to have a look at his email address and then send him an email. Now I would like to move to our next presenter, Mr. DINESH. Mr. DINESH is the department head at Kathmandu Bank, Nepal, and he has more than 18 years of experience in the banking sector. Out of 14 years is in renewable energy sector. So I'll try, Mr. DINESH, I'll try to make you a presenter now. Mr. DINESH, are you on the line? Can you hear us? Hello? It seems like we are having some problem getting our second presenter online, so I would like to move ahead and introduce our third speaker. And once we get our second presenter online, we will then shift back to him. So let me again switch back my screen. So for today, as our third speaker, we have Margarita Manjo, who is the energy finance specialist and has a background in both early stage financing as well as corporate and project financing. Margaret is currently working as a consultant at Nexus for Development Organization, where she was previously working as a senior investment manager. Marga, the floor is yours. I will now switch to your screen. So So Marva, you are now unmuted, and now I'm switching back to your screen.
1 second.
And we can see your screen.
Okay. And you can hear me fine, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks for having me. And it's funny that I'm following after Kapila's presentation, because the way that I view my presentation is really more from an enterprise perspective. And really, like, what can enterprises do to make their projects look more appealing to local banks, and not just local banks, but to other funders as well. And yes, I'll just get right into it. So one of the terms that funders usually like saying, or they say that they like to look for, are bankable projects. And what does that mean? And that's really like projects that they're willing to invest in. But we can also flip that question around and like think about it from a startup or from an enterprise perspective. And if you're an enterprise or a developer, the question you're probably asking is, will I get funding for my project? But I think we can also rethink or rephrase this question into 3 other questions, really breaking it down. And the first question is really, why am I fundraising? Before we even ask what kind of money am I going to get, the first question is really, why am I fundraising? And a lot of developers or SMEs that come to funders for funding don't necessarily have a clear idea of what exactly they need the money for and how much. And really, some of the first things we're really going to ask is like, what is the total amount of money that you're trying to raise money for, and what are you going to use it for? So some of the things that people usually say: overhead, working capital, training, things like that. And being able to really break down what you're going to be using the money for is really, really helpful. The flip side of that question is, have you tapped all of the other available sources of money? And local banks are probably the most risk averse of the different types of funders that you'd be able to approach. So things before like going to some of these harder to access like sources of financing, some of the more obvious ones, like, are there contracts that you could chase, or sales to customers, friends and family, grants, and things like that. So really, what are the available sources of money? Have you exhausted all of these other sources of funding? And at the end of the day, what we really, as a funder, what we really want to understand is, what are the sources of funds that you have for a certain project, and what are the uses of funds? And for any funder, if you have a use of funds or a project total project cost that is above what the sources of funds is, it's a bit scary when you don't know how the project is going to be fully funded. So it's really important to understand how, over the next like 3 years, 5 years, over the short to medium term, how you're going to actually fund your project. So being able to show, even in a slide or in a chart, what are your sources and what are the uses of funds is really important and very useful. The second question, when you ask, will I get funding for my project, you can also just flip that question around to, how well do I know my project? As an enterprise, or as a developer, no one knows your project better than you do. And being able to explain to yourself what your project is really important. So it's really important to convince funders with data and plans, good, reasonable business plans, and not just stories. As a person who's gone through, or like, I was working at an impact fund, and I've received many applications for funding for mini grids, or just generally like energy projects. Like, we've all seen a variation of the slide. 1.2 billion people still don't have access to reliable electricity. And this is one of those slides where people just gloss over it because we've all seen it before. But what we really want to see is how exactly your energy solution is going to be different. So it's really being able to explain your business and how it is different from a competitor, and being able to back that with data. And this goes to my third question. If you weren't in your company, would you actually invest in your own projects? Do you think it makes commercial sense? And as Kapila made really clear in his presentation, funders are pretty risk averse. And what they really want to see is how you're going to be able to minimize or eliminate the risks in running your business, and being also very cognizant that for many like funding institutions, it's not just energy projects that they're funding. So there's a lot of other things that they could be investing in. So how does your project compare to that, and how do you make a case for investing in an energy mini or in a mini grid rather than something else? How do you minimize the risks? And it really boils down to the question, does the business make commercial sense? If it doesn't make any commercial sense, no funder of any type is actually going to be interested in the project. It's really like going back to basics. Before even asking the question, how do I raise money? The fundamental question is, does the business make commercial sense? And I've broken it down into 3 different aspects of the business. So enterprise, financials, and impact. And when presenting to a funder and trying to convince a funder that the business makes sense, these all have to be corroborated with data. So I'll just go through these 3 things quickly. So the first one is really enterprise. So who is the company that we're going to be investing in? So not necessarily a borrower, but is your company a legitimate entity? Do you have the right corporate documentation? It's funny that like sometimes I even get companies that approach me who aren't even registered companies. So there's really nothing we can do until the papers are there. Being able to present financial statements, being able to present projections, and being able to even basic things like, do they pay taxes? Are they a legally registered tax-paying entity? So some of these things people don't even really think about, but these are pretty basic. The second thing that's probably more important for the earlier stage enterprises is the team. We, like as funders for early stage companies, we're investing in your project, but we're most likely more investing in the team. And when we say team, we refer to people who at least are working 30 hours per week in your project. People with some track record. If they're planning to leave, then what are the contingency plans? We want to understand who's implementing the projects, not just during the construction phase, but throughout the life of the project. What's the plan in terms of HR? How are you retaining people? And to the extent that you have people or certain skills missing, maybe try to find people as advisors to shore up the skills that are not found in your team at the moment. The second thing is really resource. And at the end of the day, as funders, what we would be looking at is not just revenues, but really cash flows. How reliable are our cash flows? And the first thing that we would look at is how reliable is the resource. So being able to show a feasibility study or a resource analysis to show that you can back, like during the year, you can produce like X kilowatt hours. And what are the long-term averages? What are the seasonalities? Second thing is really offtake and demand. And people don't really focus on this that much, but it's really, really important. When you ask how reliable will my cash flows be, it's really part of the question is the price. who's paying for my kilowatt hours, at what volume, and at what tariffs. So there are many ways of setting, for example, tariffs. It could be day and night tariff, could be wholesale, could be residential versus commercial. But what we want to understand as funders is, why is your enterprise setting the tariffs the way you're setting them up? And does that incentivize people to use more electricity? Does that help you support your business? And as well as really understanding like who your customers are. So ability to pay is not necessarily equal to willingness to pay. So even if it says in your census data that the average income for this village is X amount, that's not necessarily what they'll be willing to pay if they already have other alternatives to your mini grid. Let's say they have solar home systems, that they have kerosene, diesel generators, or something else. So just because they can afford it doesn't mean they'll pay. And we want to be able to see what you've done, or like do you have initial like survey data or things like that to prove that the community is actually willing to use the power that you'd be providing. Which goes to this next question about site selection. Who's paying for my kilowatt hours? Have you done initial surveys, demand surveys? For me, one of the things that I do soon after like listening to an investor, a developer pitch a new energy project, I'll do a back of the envelope. Let's say you're producing, you're setting up a plant with X kilowatt capacity. So that would produce Y number of kilowatt hours per year. But you've told me that your village is of this size, each house uses this much kilowatt hours. These are the productive end uses. If I add those up, I want to be able to see that the kilowatt hours that you say you can produce actually matches the demand. And what I usually find is that projects are grossly oversized, which also means that they're asking for more money than they really need. So it's really finding that balance between finding the right size of the project and being able to back the demand assumptions with data. And the next question is really, if you're choosing a site, how far is it from the national grid? And all these like other regulatory questions that come after that, which Kapila has already touched on. I think the other thing that I would consider is really looking at what are the available incentives to developers, or are these developers like taking advantage of any subsidies, tax breaks, or VAT incentives and things along those lines for clean energy projects. And some of the other things that are pretty basic, is the project legally allowed to operate? So what stage is a developer in terms of obtaining permits, land rights? Is the government helping out with that? In terms of importation, do they know how long will things take going through customs and things along those lines? And if you're asking for funding, being able to tell a funder, for example, like in South Asian countries with all of the it's hard to like get money in and out of the countries. Being able to provide or suggest workarounds, or just being really upfront, like it's going to be difficult if you're looking for debt. So finding the right types of funders for specific jurisdictions. Project specific risks, when we look at like enterprise risks, so construction, who's building the project, who's going to be paying for delays, overruns. Operations, who's doing the O&M. Dipti touched on this. So really, we're looking at the longer term life of the project. Who are you staffing to do the O&M? Do the costs make sense? Looking at impact. So this is the second part that we're looking at. So impact, it's not just spin. So a lot of, especially like clean energy companies, we got a lot of like good storytelling, but being able to like really quantify and back with data, like what are the environmental concerns, on the social side, just not just number of connections, being able to maybe show number of people that the company will employ, or because the mini grid is there, then employment in the village will go up, or there's extra income generation. So those are just examples of like social impacts that we could look at, but really being able to quantify and monitor these over time is pretty important. One of the things that funders like is additionality. And what does additionality mean? And Kapila touched on this, where he was saying, like, talking about cross-selling. And for funders, it's nice to see projects where this is not just a one-off. If we put in money in your project, there's going to be future projects that we could also be invested in. So will my project, so yeah, it's a growth story. And we also want to see that if I provide funding, maybe another local bank will join, maybe another investor will join, or because we've provided funding, the company is now able to move, do the next big project or the next big contract. So what we really want to see is growth. And with growth for a financial institution, what we want to see is that over time, we can partner up with you as you scale up your businesses. The last aspect that I want to talk about is financials. And it really goes back to what are the key drivers of cash flow, and are these cash flows subject to fluctuations outside my control? So these are things like FX risk, interest rate risk, and things along those lines. To the extent that these could be mitigated, those would be good to see. But for an enterprise, all of the other things that are actually within their control, so such as total project costs, and all of these other drivers of revenue and cost. So for example, revenue is like really thinking about, why are the tariffs set the way they are? How many people are connecting, which goes into volume? How much are they using? And over time as well, like what are the plans for productive end use? On the cost side, what is the total project cost? What are the things that maybe 5 years from now you need to replace? I don't know, if there's a storage component, you need to replace batteries or something along those lines. And then OPEX, really being able to explain what the key drivers of OPEX are, or like key drivers of overhead, key drivers of O&M costs. And for us, who see other energy projects or other energy proposals, we would also want to just, like as a funder, we'd also just ask ourselves, does this project cost make sense versus other projects that we see? And if it doesn't, then we can always walk away, because there's always stronger projects. For an enterprise, it's really important to ask, what stage of growth am I in, and what kind of funding do I need? So if I want to pilot a new type of equipment, that's probably the best time to chase a grant. If, let's say, I want partners with skills I don't have, maybe a strategic equity partner makes sense. If I don't want to give up ownership, I have stable cash flows, I'm not in the construction phase, maybe debt makes more sense. It's really asking ourselves, what kind of funding do we really need? So just to recap, going back to that first question, will I get funding for my energy enterprise, or for my mini grid? I want developers to come away with just 2 key points. The first is really come with a clear ask. What are your sources? What are your uses of funds? And being able to really back that up with data. Just doesn't necessarily have to be in a lot of detail, but being able to show what exactly you're going to be spending the money on, and what your other sources of money is really important. And the second key takeaway is really prove your business viability with data, and really kind of address like these 3 different concerns. How strong is your enterprise? How strong are your cash flows and your financials? And on the impact side, try to quantify and not just story tell. So yeah, show with data and don't just tell us a story. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marga. That was amazing. And thank you for all the key pointers that all mini-grid developers who are seeking for funding will have to keep in mind. Now I switch back to my screen. So now we come to our third and last speaker for the day, Mr. Dinesh. And now I'll try to get him online again. So
Yeah, hi Renisha, this is Dinesh.
Thank you so much. Now we can hear you.
Yeah.
So let me put your presentation on my screen.
Yeah.
And
good evening. Yeah, can I start?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening to all. I'm Dinesh DULAL. I work for NMB Bank based in Nepal. So I head the Energy and Development Organization in NMB Bank. So next. So I will just give you the brief background of NMB Bank. It's established in 1996, and we are one of the leading commercial banks in Nepal. We have FMO as a joint venture partner, and they hold 17% stake in our bank. And we are only a member for Global Alliance for Banking and Values. It's the only Nepali member. So we are just trying to promote a triple bottom line approach in our banking practice. So we are a market leader in mini grid project financing, and we won Bank of the Year in 2017 and 2018. It's both by the Banker Financial Times London. So we are based in Nepal. So we have a branch network across the Nepal. So 110 branches, 97 ATMs, and we have 4 extension counter. Next. So to talk about a mini grid project, so we have finance different kind of mini grid project. We have finance mostly Nepal has abundance hydro resources because we are a mountainous country, and it's very suitable for hydropower development. So we have even in mini grid project there are a lot of micro and mini hydro project. So we have already financed 23 mini grid based micro hydro project. It's mostly owned by the community, and a couple of project is owned by the private developer. So if you talk about the total capacity of 23 mini grid project, it's come around 850 kilowatt. And we have financed the first solar microgrid project. It's supported by ADB under their Energy for All initiatives. So they conducted Energy for All Investor Forum, and on that forum they have invited project developer to pitch their concept. So the one project developer, the solar company working with our bank, they have presented the concept of microgrid, and we agreed to finance that microgrid project as well. So another supported by the similar the ADB's Energy for All initiatives, and it's the micro hydro project, but it's targeted to provide electricity to 3 lots. They are only focusing on anchor load, so there is no community. It's in trekking route, so you don't have the household at that location. So the project, they are focused on providing electricity to lodges, which mostly used for trekking purpose. Next. So why we are in mini grid business? Why NB is interested in a mini grid project? So it's a new portfolio to the bank. So we want to diversify our energy portfolio. So we try to offer energy financing to all energy landscape. So it is start from large hydro project connected to Nepal Electricity Authority national grid, and other mini micro hydro project, and we can go up to the solar home system. So we are offering the credit facility to all renewable energy technology. So no technology indifference in selecting the project. So the another one is the portfolio diversification within energy also. So it's mostly dominated by the large hydro, but we have the small portfolio in other energy projects. So it help us to diversify our energy portfolio. So as I earlier said, we are working for a triple bottom line approach: appropriate social and environmental issue. So we are practicing the value-based banking concept in Nepal, because we are only Nepalese member on Global Alliance for Banking and Value. So we are practicing value-based banking in Nepal. So there is the opportunity for if we finance the mini grid project, there is partnership opportunity with a local institution like local government, local microfinance institution, and other community organization, and government organization also, the poverty elevation fund, and who are working under mini grid spectrum. And in Nepal, the central bank, they have provided certain target for the commercial bank, like there is a target on deprived sector lending, and there is a target on energy portfolio. So we have to have 5% portfolio in deprived sector, and we have to have 15% portfolio in electricity, the energy, and tourism. So this kind of small project, it's qualify either in energy or in deprived sector also. So there is the policy support from central bank side, and partnership with development partner, multilateral development body give some leverage for further partnership. So we have been working with one institution, and there is another follow-up program from the same institution. So we are having that kind of partnership, and it's enhance brand value also. So there is the acceptance from the community that the NMB bank, and they have even finance and the project in remote area which provide energy access to some household, like hundreds of household. So that kind of image, that kind of brand building was there, and it's ultimately contributes to several stages like the electricity access, poverty reduction, because if you provide energy access to rural community, then it will create the other enterprising opportunity, like it will create the opportunity in education sector and other different income generating activities. So it will contribute to achieve the SDGs. Practicing a few mini grid project financing model, like we are managing one micro hydro debt fund. It's provided by GIZ through government agency, Alternative Energy Promotion Center. So we have been managing that micro hydro debt fund, and providing financing to community for the development of a mini grid project. So this fund, it's kind of a blended kind of things, like it provide deposit to the bank, and it will also share certain risks with the bank, credit default risks with the banks. And we are also offering limited recourse project financing. In that, in this model, we generally ask for personal guarantee of the community user group who manage the micro hydro project in that location, but we don't ask additional collateral. So it's it's a limited recourse. We only have even legal we can take a legal recourse on personal guarantor only, and we are also providing the bridge gap financing. Like sometimes what happen, the government agency, they are willing to provide subsidy, but after completing the project only, like they have to complete the project first, and they will provide the government agency provide the subsidy later on. So there is chicken egg kind of thing. So who will provide money and to bridge the gap? So the developer, they come to our bank and will get the confirmation from government agency if the project has been completed, then government agency, they are willing to transfer that fund directly to the bank account maintained by the project developer. So we are having that kind of arrangement with government agency and the community user group. So we are just providing bridge gap financing for completing the project. And in other like a traditional lending modality, we are taking collateral and providing project financing. Next. And so there are many institutions we have been working with, like our joint venture partner FMO. They are supported us to implement the integrated renewable energy project. It's cover all the renewable energy technology, but we have financed a few projects under this program. So there is the micro hydro debt fund. It's provided by GIZ through Alternative Energy Promotion Center to provide the dedicated fund to the bank and to particularly finance an micro hydro project. And we are also the handling bank of Central Renewable Energy Fund, and at the same time we are also playing the role of partner bank. So we are managing the fund, and we are also involved in lending also. So we have recently completed this UNCDF supported Clean Start project. So under that project, we have financed a few micro hydro projects. Even this Vienna-based renewable energy and energy efficiency partnership, they are also supported us to implement the improved water mill project. So under this program, we have been able to install 13 improved water mill technology, like it's the pico hydro, less than 5 kilowatt. So we have successfully completed this project, and there is the one project is running now. It's GIZ supported renewable energy for rural area project. So under that project, we are even promoting the different kind of renewable energy technology, and we are at the same time we are focusing on solar microgrid, even micro hydro, mini hydro project, and we are focusing on province 1 and province 7 for particular this project. So next one. And so the under Alternative Energy Promotion Center, government has set up the Central Renewable Energy Fund. The few years back, this Central Renewable Energy Fund has been set up. But why there is the need of Central Renewable Energy Fund? So if you go the background, then if you see the initial phase of Alternative Energy Promotion Center, they are doing both the technical and subsidy approval under Energy Sector Assistance Program under 1, and that program has been even extended as a 2. And AEPC was also managing the biogas credit fund. So everything is everything was managed by the Alternative Energy Promotion Center. So even fund management, technical support, and other promotion kind of things. And in ISAP 2, they are just in ISAP phase 2. The government, they are trying to promote credit in renewable energy sector. So they have initiated a few program targeted to credit, and it's mostly focused on working with microfinance institution for providing loan to solar home system. So our bank at that time also actively involved in that program and provided wholesale funding to microfinance and to unload that money to rural household to have the renewable energy access. So there are a few model which got success at that time. So like the biogas credit fund, micro hydro debt fund, credit financing in renewable energy technology. So these are the initiatives taken by the government to finance a different renewable energy technology. So ultimate government target is subsidy. We are not getting on perpetual basis. So we have to move from subsidy regime to the credit regime. So they are even encouraging private sector financial institutions there to provide credit financing in renewable energy technology, working capital financing to renewable energy installer company, and they are also helping Nepalese financial institution to build their capacity in lending this kind of program. So they have taken us to DFCC Bank to show their model, and sometimes they have organized even training program within Nepal. So the capacity building support we got from the government institution, and there is the need of the institution. The government feel that there should be the one institution who can be flexible to cater even the donor program or government of Nepal, and even feel the play the bridging role between the government, the development partner, and the private sector institution like us. So the government feel that the CREP should be there to fill this gap. So they got they conceived the concept of CREP at the end of the ISAP 2. And at the start of the National Rural and Renewable Energy Project, and they have CREP will be would be the part of that the National Rural and Renewable Energy Project. So they have set up CREP. The next. And in initial stage everything has been done by the Alternative Energy Promotion Center, but after having CREP, there is some demarcation between AEPC and CREP. So AEPC mostly deal with the technical standardization, promotion of renewable energy technology, even building the awareness in community people, even the local installer company, financial institution, and even supporting in policy formulation. They are the nodal agency, so they are mostly responsible for the promotion of renewable energy technology in Nepal and providing technical approval, even providing some the technical approval for subsidy disbursement. So the function of AEPC has been specified, and the CREP function mostly on effectively managing the subsidy and credit part, and provide technical support to the financial institution on building capacity or building the credit instrument to finance renewable energy projects. So mostly the CREP mostly work with the private sector financial institution to enhance credit financing, and in order to reduce the fiduciary risks with the government, they have even closely working with the handling bank, who even the cross check the subsidy approval provided by the AEPC, whether they are in compliance with the renewable energy subsidy policy approved by the government, and then the subsidy delivery mechanism approved by the government. So the subsidy application form are in compliance with that or not. So that kind of verification is done by the handling bank, and we are doing that. So we are helping the government and to channelize or disperse the subsidy in renewable energy technology, and at the same times we are also by using different financing instrument financing model. So next.
Mr. Dinesh, are you online? We cannot hear you. Could you try speaking something to the microphone?
And
yes. Sorry, we lost you for a few seconds, but please go ahead.
Yeah. Subsidy should, in long run, should be phased out and replaced by the affordable credit. So one guiding principle for establishing CREP is that, and another one, CREP should be the autonomous institution, and it should have one mandate and well-defined management structure so that it can work independently in credit promotion and subsidy management, and achieve the self-financing and long-term sustainability. Like the CREF, they are managing the fund from different institutions, like the different development partner, they are providing fund to the government of Nepal, and from that window CREF is receiving money. CREF is the fund manager on that part, so they have a lot of money, and they can even invest that money to increase the fund they have received from government and then the development partner, and should be the legal and institutional foundation should be acceptable to the government of Nepal as well as all the development partners for CREF. So the development partner must on their agreement part by setting up the Central Renewable Energy Fund. So Central Renewable Energy Fund independently cannot work. So it has to closely work with the handling bank. So there is the financial institution which will provide subsidy management function to Central Renewable Energy Fund, and which will support the Central Renewable Energy Fund for credit promotion center. And Central Renewable Energy Fund can work with other financial institution for the credit promotion, but subsidy management part they have to work with the handling bank. So next. And yeah, this is the diagram. So the government of Nepal and development partner, there is the project steering committee, and the one compliance unit. It's established under AEPC, who look after the compliance function of all the program. And there is the CREF investment committee and CREF secretariat, and in CREF investment committee there is a representation from the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, even the executive director from Alternative Energy Promotion Center, and the CEO of another commercial bank, not from the handling bank and partner bank. It is the independent CEO from other commercial bank. So commercial bank, and then the one donor representative. So who will manage the investment function of Central Renewable Energy Fund, who will guide the Central Renewable Energy Fund for managing all the activities they are supposed to do. So there are basically three functions: the subsidy management function, and investment management function, and fund administration. And it works with the pre-qualified partner bank and other financial institutions, and it goes to the end user and household communities, technology manufacturer, distributor, installer. So they are working with the end user also. And from AEPC part, there is the policy support, technical support, and they will do the different promotional activities from government side. So next.
Mr. Dinesh, since we are over time, could you wrap up in like 1 minute?
Yeah. So it's the fund flow. So it's all the fund goes to the single treasury account. So development partner, they provide money to government, and it goes to the single treasury account, and it goes to handling bank, and through handling bank it goes to partner bank and other end user. And there is the completely two different functions. Like the subsidy part, it's done by the handling bank, and credit part, it's done from the different window. So next. So these are the incentive package. Package to the local bank who can even willing to work in mini grid sector, like the capital subsidy, the government or development partner provide to finance in mini grid project, the partial credit guarantee, debt insurance, liquidity fund, first loss guarantee, interest rate buy down, viability gap funding, challenge fund. So these are the few the package or model which can incentivize local bank to finance in mini grid project. Next. the new program, it's supported by the DFID, and it's called Nepal Renewable Energy Program. So they are focusing on the keys: governance and institution, renewable energy demand, renewable energy supply, and financing renewable energy. So the financing part, they closely work with Central Renewable Energy Fund to enhance financing in renewable energy. Next. So overall, aim of this new project is enhance productivity and market-led expansion of Nepal's renewable energy sector, leads to improve access to energy for all. So its total is 18 billion pound, and 10 million pound has been allocated for credit financing. Next. So this is the model of successful mini grid project development. Like the local bank, they have an appetite to finance in mini grid project, and we have to identify the feasible micro mini grid projects. So all mini grid projects are not financially feasible. Out of all, we have to select the most feasible one, and should focus in initial stage to finance this most feasible project. And replicate the innovative initiation we have practiced earlier, and develop a strong project development and management system within the community who manage the mini grid project. And we have to identify the risks and have a proper risk mitigation mechanism in place. And we have to have a sustainable policy to encourage commercial funding. In most of the time, development partner government, they are just willing to provide capital subsidy for project development. They are not most bother about and credit funding. So, but if the project is commercially feasible or near to commercially feasible, government can have a blended financing kind of thing and encourage commercial funding from local institution and finance the mini grid project. So this is my last slide. Yeah, next. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dinesh, and thank you so much for sharing your experience from Nepal. Now we want to move towards the question and answer session, and I'm going to pass to my colleague Dipti, who's now going to share with you the questions that have been coming, that you have been typing in your chat box. So Dipti, the floor is yours. Dipti?
Yes, yeah, thank you for those excellent presentations. I wanted to do a very, very quick review, key takeaways. So Kapila ji mentioned that the reluctance of local banks can actually be addressed through an integrated approach. Marga went through the various criteria that mini-grid developers need to address, focusing on enterprise impact and financials. And a key aspect of that is data to prove the viability of the project. And then Dinesh ji gave this wonderful example of Nepal, where they have had multiple financing programs done with collaboration between government, international development partners, and banks. And so let's get to your questions. So our first question is for Kapila ji. We have an audience member who is asking about DFCC's own lending to mini-grid. What has been your experience? How many projects have you lent to? How did you make sure the risks were mitigated?
Well, it's like this. The DFCC bank started financing these projects way back in 1993. So it's over more than 20 years back. So initially, at the very beginning, we also had these problems, but our core business those days as a development entity was project financing. But we saw the potential of this industry and decided to contributing equity for the first projects in addition to debt. So basically there again in the first project also our main
Yes, yeah, that was great. So and then we move on to Marga. How you have also been involved in financing hydro mini grids. What percentage of the applications that you received were actually financed, and what have been the more common pitfalls from developers' financing proposal?
At least like the early stage ones that I've looked at, honestly, none. But really, like the pitfalls, it's really going back to like really fundamentals. I mean, for existing projects, being able to show if you have consumption data, being able to share that. If you have financials, being able to share the financials, and being able to like share like projections in a way that's easy for a financier to understand and to play around with the numbers is really important. And yeah, it's really fundamental. So being able to show like good financials, being able to provide audited financial statements and things along those lines is really, really important.
Thank you. Yes, and DINESH, how are banks able to mitigate the monitoring costs and risks that come with financing projects in very remote locations? That's one question. And the other is, Nepal actually transitioned from an era where mini grids were financed 20, 30 years ago, and then went into a phase of subsidies, and now going back with these innovative programs you have in place, back to financing. So do you think that if programs actually started with access to financing instead of going from subsidies to financing, would that help to alleviate some of the transition challenges? So those two questions. Were you able to hear me, DINESH?
DINESH, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah. So for managing the monitoring cost, mostly we are mobilizing our nearest branch network to monitor the mini grid project we have financed. And under that micro hydro debt fund, there is the technical assistance support from GIZ. So they are helping us to cover the monitoring cost. If we want to go for a site visit, then they will cover that cost. And the project insurance part, the Alternative Energy Promotion Center, they have allocated some budget to have the project insurance. Earlier, there is no provision of project insurance. So if any micro hydro project developer, they borrowed from the commercial bank, then AEPC will help them to get the project insurance, and the premium has been borne by the Alternative Energy Promotion Center. So in that way, they are providing incentive both to the bank and then the project developer. So we have the micro hydro debt fund and support from AEPC to have a monitoring and to cover the other project related cost. And regarding the transition to excess financing excess, I think we are even financing the different renewable energy technology like the solar home system, biogas, and mini grid project. So solar home system, biogas, the smaller renewable energy technology, they are now is very competitive if you compare with the traditional technology. So we can even have that kind of system with, if we couple that system with the affordable credit. In mini grid, it's basically the location specific, and if you are developing mini grid project in tourism location where there are many hotel, even there is the anchor load from telecom tower, and even other day load on the different enterprises, then it makes sense to go on a commercial basis. But if you are developing the mini grid project which power the certain hundreds household, and you don't have much economic activities or enterprising activities in that location, then it's very difficult to finance on only going on commercial funding. So
Okay.
we have to identify the feasible and unfeasible one, and we have to blend with the government subsidy and donor support. Without
Okay.
blending, it's very difficult to go with commercial funding only.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much to all three of you. And we will send written answers to all of the other several questions that we received. I will let Renisha do the closing of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipti. I'll quickly switch back to my screen. So before we close the webinar, two short announcements. We have our third and fourth webinar coming up in September and December, so please stay tuned. And if you want to know more information about what are the upcoming topics on mini-grid based microhydro-based mini-grids, then please sign up for the HPNet newsletter. And thank you so much for taking part in today's webinar. I wish you all a good day and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.